Sometimes life has to break you before it gives you a reason to rise again. For Tom Granger, everything had already collapsed. His marriage was gone, his savings wiped out, and the father who abandoned him 30 years earlier was suddenly dead. All he had left was his 8-year-old daughter, Nora, and $12 in his checking account. That was when the letter arrived, informing him that he had inherited a farmhouse in Millbrook County from the very man who'd walked out on him without explanation decades ago. Expecting nothing but unpaid bills and decay, Tom drove out with Nora to see what was left of his father's life. The drive wound through lonely country roads until the crumbling white farmhouse came into view. But instead of emptiness, they found a massive Holstein cow standing proudly on the porch, chickens fluttering around the yard, and pigs grunting happily from behind the barn. What looked like abandonment at first glance revealed itself as something else entirely. Tom's father hadn't just left behind land. He had built a sanctuary for over 2,000 rescued animals. And now, somehow, it all belonged to Tom, a man who could barely afford groceries. As his daughter's eyes lit up with awe, Tom's heart wrestled between wonder and dread. He had inherited not just property, but a miracle, one that came with responsibility he had no idea how to bear. The truth was, Tom hadn't expected anything more than a roof with holes and memories that hurt. 3 weeks earlier, he'd been scrubbing floors in an office building when the lawyer called, telling him his estranged father, Harold Granger, had died of a heart attack. The will was straightforward. The farmhouse, 47 acres, and whatever remained inside were now his. Tom had almost laughed. What could a man who left him at 10 years old possibly have to give him now? His ex-wife had always said he couldn't even take care of himself, and the part-time janitorial work barely covered rent for a studio apartment above a laundromat. But little Nora had begged to go see what Grandpa Harold had left behind. The drive out there was filled with her hopeful questions about whether her grandfather had been a cowboy, a dreamer, maybe even a hero. Tom knew better. He remembered the man who'd left a note on the kitchen table that read, "You're better off without me." But as the gravel road gave way to the farmhouse and the unexpected sight of animals living in peaceful order, Tom realized he hadn't known the full story. His father hadn't abandoned life. He had dedicated it to saving it. And standing in the middle of that strange menagerie, Tom had to face a truth he'd avoided for years. Maybe his father hadn't been running away. Maybe he had been running toward something greater. Inside the farmhouse, Tom discovered the evidence that transformed confusion into revelation. The place wasn't derelict, it was cared for. The walls were covered with photographs of animals, each labeled with names, rescue dates, and notes in Harold's careful handwriting. Found injured on roadside, thriving now. Transferred from closing farm, gentle temperament. On the kitchen table lay a leather-bound journal filled with meticulous entries about feeding schedules, medical notes, and daily updates on the animals' progress. This wasn't just a farm. It was the beating heart of a sanctuary that had been operating for 15 years in secret. And then came the knock that changed everything. Sarah Mitchell, the local veterinarian, introduced herself as the woman who had been helping feed the animals since Harold passed. She told Tom the truth. His father had created a refuge for over 2,500 rescued animals. Horses, pigs, cows, goats, chickens, even exotic rescues. Each one alive because Harold had said yes when no one else would. Tom felt the weight crash down on him. He had $12 to his name, no farming experience, and now, suddenly, thousands of lives were depending on him. Nora, with a three-legged goat cuddled in her arms, asked the question that cut through his fear. "Are we going to take care of them now, Daddy?" Her trust left no room for excuses. For the first time in years, Tom realized he had no choice but to try. The first week was a blur of exhaustion, trial, and error. Sarah showed Tom how to feed the horses, measure grain, trim hooves, and watch for sickness. Bessie the cow followed him faithfully, nudging him whenever he was too slow. Nora proved to have natural instincts, spotting which chickens needed attention and which pigs were restless. Slowly, the animals began to accept Tom, patient with his clumsy attempts, forgiving of his mistakes. But reality came crashing down when he opened the stack of envelopes piled high on the kitchen counter. The sanctuary was drowning in debt, $67,000 owed in back taxes, loans, and vet bills. The foreclosure notice gave him 30 days before the county seized everything. Just when the hopelessness seemed unbearable, Marcus Webb appeared. Slick suit, silver hair, and a smile that never reached his eyes. He was the local developer with an offer Tom couldn't ignore. $300,000 cash to buy the property, enough to wipe out every debt and leave Tom and Nora set for life. The catch: Webb planned to bulldoze the sanctuary and replace it with a luxury resort. As Nora clutched Clementine the goat and asked, "What will happen to the animals?" Tom already knew the answer. They wouldn't be relocated. They would be destroyed, and the sanctuary that had given his father's life meaning would vanish forever. That night, Tom sat in Harold's study staring at a photograph of his father surrounded by animals, smiling in a way Tom had never seen during childhood. On the back, Harold had written, "The measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, but what you save." Those words struck deeper than any offer Webb could dangle in front of him. Selling would give Tom money, but it would also betray the thousands of lives now depending on him. The next morning, Sarah returned with a box of contacts. Harold's network of rescuers, veterinarians, and sanctuaries across the country. Within hours, phone calls began pouring in. Volunteers offered labor. Feed suppliers extended credit. Rescues pledged donations. These weren't strangers. They were people who had worked alongside Harold for years, ready to rally behind his son if he chose to continue the fight. For the first time, Tom felt like he wasn't alone. The debt was real, but so was the community of believers who had been quietly waiting to help. And as Tom walked the fields that evening, watching Nora paint handmade signs for the animals that read "Safe Now" and "This Is Home," he realized the decision had already been made. He couldn't sell. He couldn't walk away. Like his father before him, he would fight for this place, no matter the cost. The days that followed transformed the sanctuary into something larger than Tom had ever imagined. Elizabeth Morrison, a horse rescuer from downstate, arrived with volunteers and supplies. Jim Rodriguez drove 12 hours with a truck full of donated cattle feed. Maria Santos launched a social media campaign that went viral, raising thousands in small donations from strangers moved by Harold's story. Even Robert Chen, an accountant from the network, came to set up nonprofit paperwork so the sanctuary could apply for grants. It was as if Harold's hidden legacy had sprung to life, mobilizing people across states to protect what he had built. But with every step forward came more pressure. Webb filed complaints with the county, questioning the sanctuary's environmental impact. The bank reminded Tom that foreclosure was only weeks away. The numbers didn't lie. He needed $67,000 fast or everything would collapse. Still, as Tom walked among the animals at night, listening to the peaceful symphony of cattle lowing, pigs grunting, and chickens roosting, he realized something profound. This wasn't just about money. It was about proving that compassion could stand against greed, that kindness could outweigh corporate power. And in the face of impossible odds, Tom knew he couldn't back down. The breaking point came with an urgent call from Elizabeth. 43 research horses in North Carolina were about to be destroyed unless Harold's sanctuary took them in. Logic screamed to say no. He was already overwhelmed, already drowning in debt. But Tom didn't hesitate. He said yes, and within days the sanctuary became a rescue operation in overdrive. Volunteers poured in, building paddocks, hauling feed, and preparing shelters. When the trailers arrived, the sight was unforgettable. Scarred, broken animals stepping onto Harold's land, eyes filled with fear but also a flicker of hope. Nora held a hand-painted sign that read, "You're safe now," and Tom realized this was the moment his father had lived for. Not financial stability, not escape, but the choice to save lives even when it made no sense. The horses joined the thousands already depending on him, and as he ran his hand over the muzzle of a gray mare trembling with uncertainty, Tom felt his father's presence in every heartbeat. Harold had never stopped saving, not animals, not people. And now it was Tom's turn. The sanctuary wasn't just a burden. It was destiny, one that demanded faith stronger than fear. The fight was far from over. The bank's deadline loomed. Webb tightened his grip with lawyers and political pressure, and every day brought new challenges in feeding and caring for nearly 2,600 animals. But something had shifted. Tom was no longer just a janitor or a failed husband. He was a guardian, a leader, a man carrying forward a legacy built on compassion. Every rescued life, every piglet born, every goat healed, every horse learning to trust again, was proof that some things in this world are worth more than money. And as Nora whispered one night, sitting on the porch with Bessie the cow beside her, "We're home, Daddy," Tom finally believed it. This sanctuary wasn't just land. It was a promise, one he would never break. Friends, if Tom's story moved you, remember this. Legacies aren't built on what we take, but on what we save. If you believe in second chances, in the power of compassion, and in the fight to protect what matters, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I'll share another story that will remind you hope is still alive and it's waiting to be heard.